Hold on 1 second. We're Facebook Live. We ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special edition of Podcast City. I am Mike Herren, the Hurricane, and we have a very, very special guest with us today. Tim White. If you grew up in this area, you certainly know the White family and the investigative reporting element that they have brought to Southern New England for probably the last 40 years. An unbelievable father and son combination. We have Tim here today, and Tim, would like to welcome you to our very humble podcast studio here. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great, and you obviously have a low bar for special guest. if I
Come on, stop playing possibility. Usually when Tim White shows up at your door, it's bad news. Okay?
Actually, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions.
We've been down that road before, certainly. But today, a little different take to it. We're going to talk about just the amazing work that you have done chronicling the 1999 Mafia induction ceremony in Medford. Just an amazing piece that I've watched, multiple times. There, we're going to get into that in a little bit. Some unbelievable irony, some foolishness, some just it had it all in that piece. So we're going to get into that as we get going. But let's talk about yourself. Let's start at UMass Amherst.
Yeah, my alma mater.
Did you work for the Collegian when you were there?
I did. Nice job, Mike. Yeah, I wrote for the Daily Collegian, and it was just beer money, right? I mean,
of course.
Because it's a daily newspaper. It's one of the most
respected in the country for student newspapers because it is a daily, correct?
It's a daily and it's independent. And so I started working there. I enjoy writing, and so I started working there, writing stories and then copy editing, and it actually paid. It isn't like a club thing.
No.
They have advertising like a regular newspaper. So, and I
had some friends that worked. It's serious business. I've been in the newsroom there, and
I mean, it's a daily, so you had a deadline every night that you had to hit. It was high pressure, and I really liked it. So that was a big part of why I do what I do. Today was the Daily Collegian was a huge aspect of it. This is the first interview I've done that anyone has ever asked me about the Daily Collegian.
Thank you.
Nice work. You did your homework.
Well, because I like to, and he'll tell you my interview style. I like to give a little background information and kind of almost go chronologically. I think it helps me stay organized.
Sure.
And I think it's important that people can put some context to the person that we're talking about, because there's much more to you than that, drum roll, lead, big time news factor there. I mean, there's this history and a story, and I think yours is a fascinating one. I heard your dad speak to me, ironically enough, when I was at BCC in a communications class.
Oh, yeah.
I had left Boston College. I had a compound fracture on my leg playing against Seton Hall. And back in those days, before sports medicine had really evolved to what it is today, that was a career-ending injury. Now it's about a year and a half. Joe Theismann had the compound fracture.
Who could forget that?
Yeah, there's Hayward, most recently for the Celtics, had it as well, too. But now it's like you're not. But back then, it was a death sentence. So I remember, having your dad come in and talk to us, and everybody being excited. He was a great guy. So you're at the Collegian. You're making your bones, okay? You're juggling the insane party atmosphere of UMass.
I don't know what you're talking about.
The demanding curriculum, because UMass is no joke and still isn't today, academically. And then you get the Collegian going on. Where do you go from there?
So I graduated from UMass in 1996, but before I graduated, I had to do an internship for my communications degree. And I'll tell you, Mike, my concentration was actually screenwriting. Again, I enjoyed writing.
Sure.
I like a good narrative. So that was my concentration. Obviously, I'm not a filmmaker, so that didn't work out. But I had an internship at a news station in Boston, WBZ Channel 4. And that was, I think, 94, 95. I did that somewhere in there in the summer, and I loved it. It was a 3-credit internship. I was there 5 days a week on something called their assignment desk, which is like the filter of a newsroom. Information comes in and out.
Can I give a little background about WBZ? WBZ, I was told when I first entered, was like the New York Times of television and radio in New England.
Well, look at it this way. There are 3 call letters in WBZ, right? WBZ.
Yeah.
Every other place, except for a handful around the country, have 4, right?
Yeah,
WHDH, WCVB, us, WPRI. And that tells you how old WBZ is when the FCC, when the federal government would hand out just 3-letter call signs. So, that's...
so you're not entering it just someplace. You're entering at probably
at the
Mecca.
time. At the time, it was the number 6 market in the country, and if you think New York is number 1 in terms of population, it was number 6. So it's a top 10 market, and it was baptism by fire. But again, I like that energy, and I just like true stories, and I'm a sucker for good true stories, and I like the art of visual storytelling, and that working at the daily paper in Western Mass. And then combined with the visual storytelling of broadcast news at the time, because the internet really wasn't anything, that's where I was like, okay, I could do this. And then I went into radio for a while and did some radio reporting, but ultimately I wound up back in Boston working in TV, and I worked there for 10 years before coming to
10 years. Now, were you on camera? Were you producing? What exactly were you doing?
So what I did, I was mainly off camera. My first job, full-time, because BZ hired me as a part-time guy. Full-time was at WFXT right when they had launched. It was like 1999. And they used to be called Fox 25 at the time. They're called Boston 25 now. I was on their assignment desk. And then WBZ hired me again. But when I was at Fox, I was vacationing on Cape Cod, which is actually where I grew up. I went to Barnstable High School. The JFK Jr.'s plane went down. And I was out there with my girlfriend at the time.
It's right up your alley, right?
And it's breaking news. You have to cover it. So I was as close as you could get to Hyannisport, so I drove down there and I went on the air. Normally, that was my first on-air appearance, was for JFK Jr.'s crash. And then after that, when I went to BZ, I worked my way to be managing editor, so running the day-to-day operations there. And then finally in 2006, I came to WPRI. To be their investigative guy.
September 2006.
Yeah.
Any trepidation about coming home?
Yes.
I mean, you got monster shoes to fill.
That's it. You hit the nail on the head. So my father passed away in 2005.
Tell me a little bit about your father.
Okay, so my father's Jack White, and I grew up. I have 2 older brothers and a younger sister. Dad was a legend in journalism.
Iconic figure.
He won a Pulitzer Prize in 1974 for a story he did on Richard Nixon not paying his taxes. It prompted the president at the time to tell the American public, "I'm not a crook." It was my father's story that prompted him to say that. And he covered organized crime at the Providence Journal and then switched over to WPRI in the early 1980s. So Dad made it look pretty cool. I like to joke with people. Most normal kids get this bedtime story of Casey at bat. I got the bedtime story of Casey hit with the bat. That was my bedtime story. And I think that was always in the back of my mind, even though I was going to pursue film and other things. Just talking to Dad every night when he got home from work was really... It really planted a seed. So to get to your question, Mike, he passed in 2005. The news director at WPRI called me and was like, "Hey, I want you to take this job." I said, "No way. I'm not going to fill that man's shoes. I feel bad for the poor sucker who's going to do it."
And isn't there a part of you that wants to create your own bones first?
What? That's why I went to Boston.
Yeah, of course. You're
100% right. I mean, I wanted to go, and I soon quickly realized that Dad's name transcended outside Providence. So, you're Jack White's kid, and I'm certainly proud of that. But I wanted to make sure that I could do it on my own and not just in his name. So, but after a while, after a year of him pestering me, I thought, I don't want to look back and think, what if?
Sure.
If it doesn't work out, I'll go back to Boston. It's fine, you know?
Yeah.
So I took an enormous pay cut, and I went from Boston to Providence. It's been 13 years, and I haven't looked back.
How did he sell you on the pay cut, on the chasing of history? How does he sell you on that?
Awesome question. Because Joe Abuzed was his name. He knew what I did in Boston because he used to do what I did at Channel 7.
Sure. Yeah.
So I was the managing editor at Channel 4, and the managing editor knows a little bit about every story. Okay?
Yeah.
So, we're making decisions. We're covering that. We're covering that. We're not covering that. What Joe said to me was like, don't you want to know everything about one story? Don't you want to get in deep and help people and do enterprise journalism? Isn't that what you want to tell that story? You want to, and I wasn't doing as much writing in the management position as I wanted to be, and he knew that.
Yeah.
And so he leaned into it, and he was
You're
right.
getting in and out. You got what, 2-3 minute segments, possibly. I mean, you're at the surface level of it for the most part, right?
Well. So the investigations we do now, is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about before you get into the investigative. You know what I mean? You're not doing much writing.
Yes.
You got people competing for stories. You got sports, weather. You got all this stuff you got to work into. You're really not able to dig deep down to the surface most of the time.
In the position I was in, that's correct.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And now we can. We try to do in-depth pieces, and some of them run long. Sometimes my editors think they run too long. But yeah, we are able to drill down into a topic, and that was very appealing to me. And he was right. I'm glad he pestered me because it worked out.
Well, you've won 4 Emmys. Okay. You've authored a book called The Last Great Heist, which I'm going to read. Okay, in 2015, you won a very prestigious Edward Murrow Award for investigative reporting. Okay, you have replaced your father as Southern New England's go-to investigative reporter, person who was, uniquely trusted in homes from Burryville to New Bedford and everywhere in between. You have done an amazing thing in making that move. Most people probably have it as a 10-1 underdog.
Yeah.
Okay? But you are well on your way. Any regrets about coming back home?
None. Good question. But I miss Boston and friends I had in Boston, so there are personal things. Yeah. My wife is from Lawrence, Massachusetts, so she has her family all up there. Yeah. And I picked her up and moved her down to Rhode Island. Yeah. But no regrets. None at all.
No. Let's talk about your first book before we get into the Mafia, The Last Heist. It's always been a dream of mine to be a published author. Tell me how rewarding that was and getting it done and being that guy who says, hey, by the way, check this book out.
Yeah.
You might like it.
Well, first, publishing, you say rewarding, but getting to that point is so hard, so frustrating, can be demoralizing.
I've watched Bill Reynolds go through it with the 2 books about my family, so
Bill Reynolds and I and my co-authors, Wayne Worcester and Randy Richard, we have the same literary agent. If it weren't for Bill Reynolds, Mike, this book wouldn't be published because we were having trouble selling the idea to a literary agent who you need to get to a publisher.
Sure.
And Bill said, hey, try my guy in New York, and we did. They liked it, and then they were able to sell it to a publisher. So
St. Martin, did you go with St. Martin at all? Because that's the book where Bill...
No, our publisher is Globe Pequot, which is a imprint of Rowan. Oh boy, I forget the mothership publisher that it is, but that's the thing. The literary agents build a relationship with publishing houses, which is why you need one. But it's so hard to get a literary agent if you're not already published. It's like a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah.
How do you get published if you don't have a literary agent? How do you get a literary agent if you're not published? So Bill. To put a loop on that was vital in getting that done. The Last Good Heist was a project that took 8 years to research, but 1 year to write. Because, Mike, when you sell a true crime, you don't write the entire manuscript. You write the first 3 chapters, a chapter by chapter summary, and then a pitch or a proposal. Yeah. That's what your literary agent goes to publishing houses to sell. And then when it gets picked up, like ours did, they go, okay, you got 1 year. We need 80,000 words in 1 year. And
what's that process like? I mean, like, give me a breakdown. You have kids at the time?
I do. I have 2 kids now, and I had 2 kids then. Yeah.
2 kids then.
Yeah.
You move back home. I mean, how do you get it done? How do you put that book into 1 year? How do you put 8 years of research into 1 year?
Every reporter needs a deadline. If my editors didn't give me a deadline for the first story I did in 2006 with WPRI, I'd still be working on it. Yeah. And I think it was key that the publisher said, okay, if you want this advance, you need to have it was June 1st of, I think, 2016. We had to have the manuscript into them. And boy, does that motivate you to get that done. So the answer to your question is you just got to do it. You just got to buckle down and do it. As much as I like writing, and Wayne Worcester was really the key voice in the writing on that. His writing is so good. I like the writing, but any reporter will tell you they love the hunt. They love the reporting part of it, which means the research of it. Going out and finding this wise guy, tracking down, did that person die? How did they die? Can we find the transcripts from that trial in 1975 that would be buried in some court archive somewhere? That stuff is what, really recharges your battery every single day. The challenge is you have this body of work after 8 years of working on it. How do you compress it into a book? And what's the narrative arc? Who's telling the story? In this case, we used the lead gunman, a guy named Bobby Dussault, to tell the story. He's no hero. He spent the majority of his life incarcerated, but he's sort of an anti-hero, but he seemed to us to be the best person to tell the story through. But you have to make these decisions because you could tell the story through a cop. You could tell the story through a journalist. You could tell the story through another bad guy.
In today's day and age, though, the anti-hero has come out of the shadows now, and look at your Tony Soprano.
They're more embraced.
Breaking Bad.
You're 100% right. They are more embraced. The only, and we can get into this when we talk about the Mafia tapes if you want, but I think some of it that is important to me to push back on when we're talking about anti-heroes, especially true life, is especially with organized crime, Hollywood tends to glamorize it, and Tony Soprano is and I got to tell you, organized crime is not glamorous.
I know.
And that's. I think it's hard to read that book. I think it's hard to watch the documentary, the Mafia tapes, and go, "Oh, the mob is glamorous," right?
No, it isn't. I mean, I have read every book about John Gotti, most from Boss of Bosses to Mike Francese's book. I mean, it's always been like a secret passion of mine. And the one thing that many of the investigators and the FBI people and the truly educated people say is how dumbed down it is, and how
well they feed on each other, right?
Yeah.
I mean, their commodity is their commodity is money and whatever. But there's this. It's supposed to be about trust and family. Omerta, La Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours. And what do? They turn on each other constantly, which is what the Mafia tapes was all about. They take this oath of secrecy and this brotherhood. And
meanwhile, there's a handful. There's
some of them are in the ears of an FBI agent, and some of that is a power struggle. You take out this guy, you get him arrested, him indicted. Sure. Well, that opens up an avenue for you to elevate to capo, underboss,
and the people that are doing are usually the ones closest to you, correct?
Sure. Yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, in the book, we talk about how the lead gunman in that. The mob sent his best friend, a guy named Chucky Flynn, to Las Vegas to kill him. I mean, that's sort of the MO. How do you get close enough to kill someone? You send your best friend. You send a family member. Sure. And, it's a common theme in that world. So when we talk about glamour, that's not glamour. No. You're always looking over your shoulder. No. You're feeding on each other. There's no honor among thieves. And there's that Godfather, Mike, that Godfather perpetuation of they don't deal with narcotics. They absolutely dealt in narcotics.
And they always did. Let me ask you a question. Did you ever have to take a step back and say, hey, wait a minute. These guys are bad guys. Were there any father-son talks about this?
Yeah, so when I started getting older, now keep in mind, Dad reported on organized crime when it operated like a secondary government, when Raymond L.S. Patriarca was on Federal Hill until he passed in 1984. And as I got older, I was like, wait a minute. these guys go to jail for killing people. My father reports on them. Hey, Dad. And he said to me, you have as much to worry about mobsters as bankers when doing this job, so get it right. And it didn't resonate with me at the time, but I understand it now better. And that is quickly, look, journalism is a dangerous job, and we're certainly in the current climate not super popular, and we're under fire.
Sure.
I don't care if you're covering a mob boss or if you're that young reporter who's doing a drive-by gangbang shooting in downtown, whatever.
Sure, yeah.
It's dangerous.
Absolutely.
To be there.
And having a face on the story like yours
or your byline or your name on it, you own the story. So that is the second part is the important part, Mike, which is your face is on it, your name is on it. You're on safer ground when you get it right. When you get it wrong, you got problems. And I'm always upfront with, if I'm doing an organized crime story, the made guys are not going to comment for the story generally, but I always let them know either to them directly or through their lawyer the story's coming, so they're never surprised. And I think there's an understanding. They're bad guys, they do bad things, the cops try and catch them, we tell that story. There's sort of that triangle of understanding that goes on there. If I get the story wrong...
Do they understand that you have a job to do?
They do. And I think there's a lot of them, too, that also have a legacy they want to cement as they get older.
Sure.
And that's where we come in, right? We tell that story. And they want the story told, for the most part, accurately, as long as it doesn't lead to other criminal charges. So sometimes they only tell you half-truths. But there is this... I guess, underworld pride that exists, and sometimes there's a moment in which they're going to reach out to you, and they're interested in having that story told. Which is why the last good heist, there was a challenge in telling a story that was, now 40 years old, because it's in the analog era. You can't just Google this heist. You have to go out and find it. FBI agents who would never talk to you then are going to talk to you now. Wise guys who would never talk to you then, they're going to talk to you now. So there's even though there are the challenges of trying to dig up stuff from 40 years ago, there's benefits too.
Sure. Let's dig up some stuff from 1989, the Mafia tapes. This is your latest thing that you're putting it out there. Just an amazing story. And as I watch this piece, which is about a half hour long,
24 minutes.
24 minutes long. It's amazing, and what I found it funny is, not funny, but that it's never been told in a book before. It has been told, but not as in depth.
In bits and pieces,
In bits and pieces, or on the big screen or anything like that. But let's fast forward to 1989, I believe.
That's right. October 29th, 1989.
Medford, Massachusetts neighborhood.
Yep.
In a town that would be familiar with some organized crime activity.
Sure.
Surely, you have certain towns that are more related to that. A Mafia initiation ceremony is recorded. Mm-hmm. Okay? Joseph J.R. Russo, Vincent Federico, Raymond Jr. Patriarca, his Angiulo, Sonny Mercurio are there. Vincent Federico, Bobby
DeLuca,
Carmen Trattoria, and Richard Floramo are there to be sworn in. Mm-hmm. But the big surprise so are the feds.
Well, they were there electronically.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that these two worlds were so intrinsically close in this neighborhood.
Look, physically close.
Physically close. I mean, you talk about the swearing-in ceremony happens, and 2 houses down, an active FBI agent
lives
there
with his family. Yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, so 4 men were sworn in that day, and they had gotten the FBI had gotten wind that this was going to go down. Raymond Jr. Patriarca was the mob boss, and he was doing the swearing in to try and mend the fences. A couple of violent things had happened, including his underboss had been killed down in Connecticut. So he was trying to
and they attempted to kill Cadillac Slemmy as well too.
Yep, right on the
was that the same faction?
There was the same renegade faction out of Boston.
Sure.
Aligned themselves with a renegade faction from Western Massachusetts, which was being controlled by Billy Grasso of Connecticut. They weren't happy with the way things were going under Junior Patriarca, and so they were going to whack Grasso, which they did.
Yeah.
They were going to whack Cadillac Frank Salemi, who had close ties to Junior Patriarca. He got shot a couple of times up in Saugus. A lot of your listeners might remember that. And guess what? Junior Patriarca was on that list too, and they were going to. It was a big. They were going to take over the family. After that happened, Junior was like, I got to do something.
Okay, so he extends an olive branch,
you got
a peace offering. Tell me some of the people in that renegade faction in Boston. Do you remember any of them?
Sure. I mean, J.R. Russo, you named one of them as part of that renegade faction. And what does Junior Patriarca do? He names him consigliere going into that ceremony. A lot of the names that you rattled off, Vincent Ferrara, Floramo, were all part of that. You know, Angiulo, Sonny Mercurio was also part of the Boston faction, but the big twist with Angiulo with Sonny was he was the mob informant that told the FBI that this induction ceremony was going to go down, and so he was the guy that made sure the FBI knew what was about to happen, and that's why they were able to wire up the house. And as you started this topic with, you know, the FBI agents learn the location and they go, hey, I think this agent of ours lives down the street.
Also, Vincent Federico was on furlough.
He was on furlough, yes.
When he was to go get made, and the address that he put on where he would be was where this initiation ceremony is taking place.
So that was his sister's house.
Yeah,
but what he wrote, so when and furloughs don't happen anymore, but we're talking 1989.
Since Willie Horton? Did Willie Horton kill furlough?
He might have. When was Willie Horton? That Willie Horton was pre-1989. Dukakis was so it would have been before. So anyway, Federico fills out an application that he's, why he needs to get out, and he writes in the application for family business with a capital F, and that was, I think, tongue-in-cheek in his part, but no laughing matter, because the feds were struggling, despite the information from Sonny Mercurio that an induction ceremony was going to happen. They were struggling with the location. So when Vinny Federico put that down in the paperwork, that helped them kind of laser in on where this thing could go down. And Mike, this, it's not 2019. This is 1989. They didn't have the technology that we're dealing with right now doing this podcast. They had to physically run a wire from the house at 34 Guild Street to the special agent's house at 16 Guild Street, along the telephone poles and the whole thing. And the recordings are really crappy. I mean, we cleaned them up digitally using a program called Audition.
I thought that you must have cleaned them up.
We did.
Cleaned them up.
And actually, we do. You can watch the documentary on.
No, there's no journalistic integrity questions when you clean them up like that?
We disclosed it.
Okay.
So, and we're doing it so you can have a better understanding of what you're listening to. We are not altering what is being said.
No, of course not.
And we're using government transcripts. But if you go to WPRI.com and you click on the 12 on 12, the Mafia tapes banner or box, and you can watch it. If you scroll down, there's a bunch of other elements, and it includes a little how we cleaned up the audio tapes in there. It's about a 1-minute video on how we did that.
It's amazing, I'll tell you. Okay, so we're in Medford. We're at the ceremony.
Yep.
It's a gang that couldn't shoot straight, with the informants being embedded in the initiation ceremony. There's a woman downstairs in the cellar. We'll talk about that a little bit. But let's just take the heart rate and the pulse of the Boston mob right now. But before, leading up to these events.
Okay.
My father was a state legislator. Mm-hmm. Okay. He used to bring me to Jerry and Julio's pizza place.
Mm-hmm. In the North End.
In the North End.
Yeah.
He served with a lot of Italian American people. They were famous, but it was before it wasn't cool to be in the news as a mafia guy then. You know what I mean? John Gotti kind of broke all the laws when it came to that.
Sure.
Now, what is the Angiulo's relationship with the Patriarchas after the father goes?
So Jerry Gennaro Angiulo, whose pizza shop you went to, he was the underboss to the old man, to Raymond L.S. Patriacca. And he was apparent to be where the understanding was for Raymond L.S. Patriacca.
So he had a good working relationship.
Well, sure. I mean, there, I think power is intoxicating, and I can't jump into Angiulo's mind. Yeah. So I think, he always wanted to be boss, I'm sure, and boss comes with more revenue.
Yeah.
But what happened is Raymond L.S. Patriacca dies in 1984. Gennaro was indicted, I think, in 1983. I think I have that date right. So all of a sudden there's this hole, and Gennaro Angiulo is in prison, so he can't be the boss. So the junior Patriacca is made the boss at that time.
And he's in prison because of Whitey Bulger, correct?
Well, Gennaro Angiulo? Yeah. So that's right. So Whitey Bulger, Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi, they were providing information to an FBI agent. We all know John Connolly about the mob. And we talked about this earlier. Why would Whitey Bulger and Stephen Flemmi do that? Well, they get those guys off the street. Yeah. There's more business for them. Right. And that's why they did it.
I've read all the books about Whitey Bulger. Again, my favorite is All Souls. Have you read All Souls?
I have not read All Souls.
That's the one you really should read.
Okay.
That's the one.
I like Shelley Murphy's Whitey Bulger book.
Which one was that?
Shelley Murphy and Kevin Cullen wrote a book on
Shelley's
Whitey.
The one that's on.
She's in it.
Was that Black Mass?
No, that's a good one too. That's Dick Lair's book, Black Mass. Hers is just Whitey Bulger. Is just
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'll read it. Black Mass is about Celtic grew up in that time, and it's before Whitey was overexposed.
You mean All Souls is?
All Souls is, excuse me.
Yeah.
Was about, before Whitey was, his older brother was Frank the Tank McDonald, who's in all of the stories about Whitey Bulger. They were doing a armored car heist. He was bleeding. They didn't want the DNA in the car. They executed him on the street. It was like the beginning of when Humpty Dumpty started getting some cracks. That's where the All Souls comes in. It's from the same project Whitey grew up in. It's very, very interesting. It won the American Book Award. I want to say 16 years after its release, maybe 15 years after its release.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating tale. How easy did Whitey and Steve Flemmi move within the Italian underworld of the Mafia in New England? Were they looked at as treacherous? Were they looked at as partners? What were they?
I think it depends on who you're talking about. If you're talking about Cadillac Frank Salemi, they moved easily. Cadillac Frank Salemi and Stephen Flemmi were tight. Yeah. And little did Salemi know. He found out when he was indicted in 1994 that Flemmi was providing information on La Cosa Nostra in New England throughout that time. I mean, there were on and off power and gang wars, but I think Bulger and Flemmi operated as an independent faction, and they did so very successfully. Again, though, was there trust? Maybe, yeah, sure, but they did so because they were able to navigate those waters with the assistance of the federal government.
They had Trump card in their back pocket.
That's right. Sure. They're able to get information fed to them, which is why people were killed, and that's a terrible story and a black eye for the FBI at the time. With that type of information, they are able to grow and be successful in the underworld.
We're going to hop back into Medford, what's going on, but I just want to give some context to the state of the mob today. Was there ever a Mafia contract to kill Whitey Bulger? Do you have any knowledge of was there ever any Mafia contract, whether from the Patriarchas or from the Angiulos or from anybody?
I have to dust off my memory. I can't recall one.
I don't recall one either.
Well, I mean, certainly after.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, I'm talking about
and,
like.
And
before,
he is dead now after being beaten to death in prison. So.
But before any of this came to light, I wonder if there was anybody in the organizations from Springfield to Boston to Providence to New York, even that said Connecticut.
He was the definition of fear, and that was his power. That was his. His commodity was fear.
Yeah.
So, I think it would be hard to get the muster to take someone like who's that powerful out.
Sure.
But anyway, to answer your question, I'm not aware of that era if there was.
So essentially, when this is going on, and you said it's tough times for the mob.
Sure.
RICO,
Yeah.
technology developing, people are informing at like a record rate at this time. It's a tough time for the mob. Is going on. In this ceremony, how many people in the house do you think were compromised?
What do you mean by compromised?
We're playing with the federal government. Well, I'm not saying all the way, but we talk about somebody with some whispers in some ears and stuff. How many people were compromised and how many people became compromised?
The became one is easier. What we know is one person in that house was compromised on October 29th, 1989, and that's Angiulo Sonny Mercurio, who we talked about.
Yeah, he was the only one at the time?
He was the guy at the time that we're aware of that was compromised. Now, who else became compromised after that? Robert Bobby DeLuca is the first name that comes up. He was one of the 4 men that was sworn in that day to be a soldier. He was later elevated to capo or captain in the New England crime family. He was tight with Francis Cadillac Frank Salemi, who, Mike, was absent from that swearing-in ceremony.
Very wisely. He said,
well, two reasons. Two reasons. He had, he was still recovering from bullet wounds.
And these guys tried to kill him.
So in his mind, I'm sure he was probably wondering if that would have been another setup for a hit if he were to walk in there. But DeLuca and Salemi were very tight, and as Salemi's star rose, so did Bobby DeLuca's. In the end, though, Bobby DeLuca ended up cooperating after he learned, Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi, Angelo Sonny Mercurio, Whitey Bulger were all informants, and he goes off to prison. In the wake of all that, he's looking around him going, I'm not going to do a day for these guys that I don't trust. And in 2006, one of the things we reveal in our documentary, which has never been reported before, was we know that DeLuca cooperated in a 2011 prosecution of organized crime that took down mob boss Luigi Baby Shax Minacchio, and D'Annunzio was affected by it up in Boston. But we know from now that he actually contacted the Rhode Island State Police in 2006 to start working with them. And I think, again, that's DeLuca not wanting to do a day for people he doesn't trust, but also trying to clear the path possibly to his elevation through the family to potentially become mob boss someday, which never happened. Throughout that time, though, he didn't drop a dime on Cadillac Frank Salemi. We talk about this murder that Salemi was eventually convicted of a guy named Stephen DeSaro. Look, DeLuca knew Salemi was involved in that murder, and when he was working with the feds, he kept telling them, I don't know anything about it. Which he did know about it because he helped bury that body. So he did try and protect Salemi up to a point, and then fast forward to, I think it was 2016, they dig up the body of Stephen DeSaro in Providence. I was there, and
that was a nightclub owner, right?
That was a nightclub owner out of Boston, and that was an unsolved murder from the 80s. From the 90s, and that was at the point Bobby DeLuca he was convicted of perjury for that, but he ended up testifying against his old pal, Cadillac Frank Salemi, at a trial up in Boston, which I covered. So in 2 ways, he broke that oath of omerta that he took on October 29th, 1989. 2 ways that we know of.
Was it the RICO Act? Was it the watering down, the drugs, the greed? What do you think contributed the most to made guys betraying the code of omerta? Because you see it happen pretty much around the same time, the late 70s, 80s. This is where it suddenly becomes kind of okay. They're not okay in their world, but it's happening where for years and years and years and years, there might have been 1 or 2 of them that did, but most didn't.
hands down, it's a RICO statute, and the RICO statute, for your listeners to understand, is a conspiracy statute.
Sure.
So that is a continuing criminal operation
With 6
charge.
people, correct?
I don't think there's a set number on that. There are predicate acts,
Sure.
and I think it's 5 predicate acts. But I don't want to get into the weeds and litigate RICO. The point is, before RICO at the time was fairly new. I think that legislation passed in the late 1970s, but it really hadn't started being used, and it was designed specifically to cripple La Cosa Nostra in this country.
Yeah. Giuliani put it into effect, right?
Giuliani used it.
Yes.
The Congress passed it.
Yeah.
What it really wasn't used until the 1980s, and Gennaro Angiulo was one of the first in this region to feel the sting of the RICO Act. And the RICO Act, they can reach back decades to crimes. Murder happens in the 60s. You might not have pulled the trigger, but you were part of the conspiracy that took part. So you will be.
Sure.
You're going to prison for murder.
Sure.
So that was a powerful tool, and is a powerful tool. It's still in existence for prosecutors, and it came with punishing, crippling prison sentences. So when you ask about why did guys start flipping, it was because they're going to go to prison for forever.
And prisons also changed.
Yes, you're not making, you don't have your kitchen.
Yeah, you don't have your kitchen and your recliner.
which did exist. I mean,
Sure.
that stuff at the ACI in Cranston. I mean, they segregated that prison based on who people were, and the mob guys had their own wing.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And they ate well.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. Now, one thing about the RICO, many scholars question its constitutionality, right?
Well, they question conspiracy charges a lot as a whole, because it can be, if you're the little drug dealer who's peddling drugs on the streets of Fall River, and way up the chain is the guy who's making the drugs, as part of the chain conspiracy of that, you can be held responsible in theory all the way up. So there's a lot of folks that think that the conspiracy acts in this country have led to an increase in the prison population, can be particularly damaging on the little guy. I think you're right. I think for a lot of folks it's controversial.
We can blame RICO, we can blame technology, we can blame drugs, we can blame anything. But doesn't the Mafia have some responsibility for their decline as well, too?
Oh, sure.
I mean, they let a woman who worked for Ray Flynn, okay, in the house. I get it. Listen, I get it. But today's day and age, I mean,
look,
it takes more identification and scrutiny to go into the legalized marijuana places in Massachusetts than it took to get into this induction ceremony.
Hold on to that one induction ceremony.
Yeah,
the reason we look back, it was the 30th anniversary of that induction ceremony. Isn't that
amazing.
Nuts? I know. It felt like yesterday, but that was the first one that was ever recorded, and in this country, it's the last. It hasn't ever happened again when they've opened the books. And when I say they,
one of the darkest days in the history of the mob, I would think, without question.
And not only for New England, Mike, because they were able to use these tapes to prove the existence of the organization. And this is important because this sounds dumb, but before 1989, you could have a mob defendant walk in and go, the government's full of crap, the organized crime doesn't exist. Now there was an induction ceremony that said, oh, no. You prick your trigger finger, you burn the card of the saint in your hand, and you lay out the structure of the family. Organized crime does exist. And just the weight of that evidence
was used in trials all over the country.
And sometimes it never got to trial because people would just plead out. And there was a lot of procedural fights going into cases like, you can't use those tapes because it doesn't have anything to do with these defendants, and that would be litigated back and forth. But that just, that's like the 800-pound elephant in the room, or gorilla in the room were those tapes. But to the woman in the basement, her name was Patty Pappas. She was the girlfriend of Vincent Federico, who, again, to remind people listening, he's the guy that was in prison, got out on furlough. He was one of the 4 that was going to be sworn in that day. She drove him from the prison, I think he was at Walpole, but I could be wrong, to the house in Medford. And she just stayed in the basement watching TV for the hours and hours that this induction ceremony was going on. Mike, I don't think those guys up there knew she was there except for Vinny, right? I mean, they had no idea that she was down in the basement listening and the whole thing. So, but it does speak to, boy, this thing was doomed from the jump.
Unbelievable.
The FBI agent living on the street, Sonny Mercurio tipping him off, Patty Pappas in the basement watching daytime soaps. I don't know what she was watching, but it is crazy to think everything that could have gone wrong for
people that are
Patriarca
so careful of their lives are spent eluding traps
law enforcement.
Like this.
Sure.
And they on arguably one of their biggest moments.
I think you're right. I think,
they fall into it.
The funny thing is, no laws are broken that day. You can hold as many induction ceremonies as you want. It's your First Amendment right to, do whatever you want to do. But because of what we discussed, that it proved the existence of the organization, it was devastating.
Yeah, it certainly was. It's a fascinating piece. Check it out. I-Team Investigates. It's going to be all over my Facebook.
I need you to get the branding right. We're Target 12. We're Channel 12, so it's WPRI.com.
My bad.
No, it's okay.
Target 12 Investigates, right?
Target 12 Investigators. Yeah. That's what we're called. But if you go to WPRI.com, you can find the documentary.
I should know better than that.
That's
WPRI.com. Check it out. It's going to be all over our Facebook page. We've got over 1 million people in our Facebook. So it'll be on the 4 of a Beat, my page, and we're going to be sharing it with thousands of you out there before today and the week is done. Let me ask you a couple more questions, and I appreciate you coming here.
Sure.
Has the mob been over-prosecuted? When I see mob arrests now...
If you ask a mobster, it has been.
I say enough is enough. I say, sometimes it takes a while for the pendulum to swing back. Not to glorify them, because I understand exactly what we talked about earlier about the type of life that they live and the treachery and all of it amongst it. But are they really the number one criminal element? I mean, we know when it comes to the feds, it's terrorism, public corruption. But are they number 3 now? Are they more of a threat than the Bloods or the Crips in Los Angeles or the Latin Kings? Or haven't they been surpassed by some of these by some of the street gangs who have gone nationwide now?
Sure. So it depends on what region you're in. The FBI, the number one threat assessment for the FBI is terrorism, hands down, full stop. Yeah. Now, they do other threat assessments. And for organized crime threat assessment, the number one threat assessment in L.A. might be the Latin Kings. The number one threat assessment in Chicago could be something else. In New England, the last time they would tell me on the record, it was still considered La Cosa Nostra in terms of power. Now, again, this is organized crime, okay? So that you have to keep, that's a very specific jar that we're putting it in.
Yeah.
The special agent in charge of the Boston office.
Where the street elements, the street gangs, some of them may not reach to that level of organized crime. Some would.
Sure.
Probably most wouldn't.
Right, and I think it's what is their reach? I mean, you have some law enforcement will tell you have some gangs in Lowell that are pretty powerful, but what is their reach beyond Lowell? And there are ethnic gangs that they keep tabs on. The Russian mob has a presence in New England for sure. Now, I will tell you, just in full disclosure, the head of the Boston office of the FBI, a guy named Joseph Bonavolanta, I asked him what is considered the number one threat assessment for organized crime. His predecessor answered that for me. He wouldn't answer that question. So I don't know if it's changed for this region. But yes, it is organized crime, traditional organized crime, capital M Mafia, is a shell of what it once was, Mike. And to your question about enough is enough, prosecuting, keep in mind
it's the allocation of resources, isn't it? I mean, we don't have it to go. Ever since the terrorism of 9/11, it's been portrayed in The Sopranos, it's been portrayed in books and magazines and everything. There's only so much dollars and agents to go around.
So what I think they will tell you is a couple of things, and I won't belabor it, but first of all, a lot of a good chunk of the prosecutions you're seeing now are historical. We referenced a couple of them here, but, the murder of Stephen DeSaro. I sat with Stephen DeSaro's family, and Frank Salemi and a co-conspirator were found guilty in that. That remained unanswered for 30 years, right?
Sure.
They deserve justice, and so that is technically an organized crime case, but it's going back 30 years. So they put the resources into that to prosecute.
But let me ask you a question: is that same family in Chad Brown going to get the government's resources to look into some unsolved crimes that may have happened there?
Yeah, maybe not.
Or do they get it because it's a mafia?
Right. Well, there was
there's a mafia.
So the crime at Chad Brown might fall under a state investigation.
Sure.
Because we're talking about organized crime figures. There are federal statutes that can apply to these cases, and so you got the federal government's resources.
It's not quite as simple as I
no, but I like your question. I think it's a fair question, and I think it's probably a question that the folks in Chad Brown probably ask. Yeah. If the victim was someone else, would they get more resources to that? And that is a tough one sometimes for law enforcement to answer. Now, there are other prosecutions of illegal sports betting that we see with organized crime figures. More and more they're mob associates as opposed to made members, because we're not sure how often they're opening the books anymore for that kind of a thing. I think what they'll tell you when I say they, I mean law enforcement, is if you don't take care of these things periodically, it allows it to mushroom.
But the state is in the sports gambling business now.
So I love this. So if you think about it, the government is legalizing everything organized crime profited off it.
Exactly.
Let's start with the lottery. People think the lottery's been around forever. It hasn't. Yeah. And it used to be mob-run bingo operations and corner stores, which are like Keno.
Or textile mills and factories in front of us. Same type of people would play the number. And the number was the last four numbers of the index of the New York Times, right? Or something like that.
Oh, is that true? I actually don't know that one. That's tremendous. That might have been. And then, you're right. Now in Rhode Island, there's sports betting. Yeah. And now in Massachusetts, marijuana is legal. So it is pretty funny to think the federal government, you could almost joke, looked at the mob and said, hey, they're making a lot of money off that over there. Maybe we should dip our toes into some of the sins that they're able to profit off of.
How many made men in Providence right now?
It's a tough one to answer. I mean, there are some that we know of. Matty Guglielmetti was released from prison. He was a capo. He was at the induction ceremony in 1989. Yeah. Just one of the old school mobsters that he is out now. Louis Minacchio got out of prison. He's around. I am hearing, and I don't want to go into detail here, but I'm hearing that there have been or will be soon other members that are inducted. Now, the question is, are they loosening the protocol? Do you have to have the pure Sicilian blood, that kind of a thing? I don't know, but they certainly lean into more the use of mob associates, which is not a new thing. I mean, this is, the Wilmette faction of Rhode Island used to be a very powerful faction. Yeah. Wilmette is obviously not an Italian name. Yeah. They weren't made members, but boy, were they a ruthless faction of organized crime under Raymond L.S. Patriarca. And why? Because they made money. And so the use of mob associates isn't new, but it is, I think it's leaned into a little bit more now than it probably was 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Sure. What's the next piece of work? I mean, what are you going to do? What's next then? Yeah,
Rhode Island in southeastern Mass keeps me busy. I mean, your mayor keeps me busy.
Yeah. I was going to take a break, and we're going to talk about that for 5 more minutes if we could. Can you hang around for 5 more minutes?
Yeah, I can.
We're going to take a break right now. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about Jay's career, the ex-mayor of it, and the trials and tribulations of his administration, covered by my man here to the left of me. We'll be back. Target 12 investigated, WPRI.com. WPRI.com. Target 12 investigators. Check out his work. It speaks for itself. We'll be back with more right after this.
Another summer has passed, and once again your dream of having a pool in your backyard has come and gone. Right now is the time to make sure it doesn't happen again. Call Apollo Pools and Spas now and lock your date in for the pool you have always wanted, for you, your family, and friends to enjoy. Don't wait another minute. Call Mellons at Apollo Pools and Spas at 508-923-7381. 508-923-7381. Apollo Pools and Spas is located on Route 44, Lakeville, Mass. In today's day and age, security isn't a luxury, it's a must. That's why it's time you call Total Security Technology. Whether you're protecting your house from a break-in or package poachers, or protecting your business from vandals or thieves, Total Security Technology will help prevent the crime from happening or catch the criminal in the act with a state-of-the-art security system. Call the area's foremost security expert, Scott Bazinet, at Total Security Technology for a consult. Call Scott at 401-297-7982. That's 401-297-7982. Quality counts at Highland Fence. Highland Fence has been keeping neighbors friendly and protecting your businesses for 31 years. That's 31 years of serving Southeastern Mass and Rhode Island. Whether it's residential or commercial, Highland Fence's reputation is second to none. Remember, quality counts at Highland Fence. Call Highland Fence at 508-678-4650. 508-678-4650.
Life around here is hard. Money, unemployment high, and sometimes opportunities far away. You work hard, at times you might not have the time or the energy to fight. Insurance companies in corporate America have endless resources and their pockets are full, and they don't fight fair. That's why when it comes to your legal matters, you need someone who's fought them and won over and over again. Someone who's going to take it personally, not get intimidated.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to do the special addendum. I want to thank my man here for doing that because he's a busy guy. But let's talk about Jay's career.
Sure.
And the boy mayor, the boy king, who just had this unbelievable rise and then this unbelievable crash on the way down. What did you... Some people in Florida, including myself, I was never fooled. Time hop on social media tell you that. But he surely had a lot of us fooled. Talk about covering him, the rise and fall, and what was anything that you would take away from that situation?
Well, it's a pretty stunning. The second indictment is pretty stunning. I mean, the first one, the business Snow Owl, we covered that. Yeah. The second one, which was just alleging, which Mayor Correa has pled not guilty to, widespread corruption and really brazen corruption. When I'm reading that indictment when it was dropped, I couldn't. It read like almost a bad novel. Yeah. That somebody would be so brazen driving the city vehicle to go pick up an alleged bribe, and all of that. And look, this is money. If the government has the case right, this is money that is taken from your pocket. Okay, now this is Jazel's alleged to say, I'll lower the required payments from this pot business if you give me this money now. So he is, just do the math on that. He's pocketing that, whatever it was. I don't have the indictment in front of me, $50,000 in that case, that would have gone into city coffers to fix the streets, to pay a teacher's salary, whatever it might be. And that's I think sometimes there's a disconnect there because people get caught up in a personality. They might like someone because he's shaking a lot of hands or things like that. I think what the U.S. Attorney's Office is trying to do is show how that affects people directly. The covering him is challenging, and I cover sort of the U.S. Attorney, the federal side, but particularly my colleagues trying to talk to him. He'd hold and I do air quotes, quote unquote, press conference where he wouldn't take any questions. He sets up a website against a Fall River Herald news reporter. Her name is Joe Good.
Yeah, I know Joe Good.
And it's a picture of Trump saying fake news. So he's trying to. I think he's trying to pull an element from the Trump administration, and it's an old thing. This is not new. It's not new to Donald Trump, but to attack the press and make them the enemy, as opposed to, why not just answer the questions and speak the truth?
What she was succeeding at during the first indictment. I think some people looked at him as a sympathetic figure.
Yes.
He was a young kid. He had a lot of money that he had access to. He made some poor decisions. He's not the first, not going to be the last to do that. Supposedly, it had nothing to do with while he was mayor, yada, yada, yada. That's the bill of goods he sold to people, and that's why he was reelected. Despite being recalled.
So the recall election, though, that's an interesting one. I think political scientists are going to be looking at that for a while. I mean, the majority of Fall River voters who voted in that voted to recall the mayor of Fall River.
Sure.
The ballot was so packed after that he was able to get reelected. So I think there were a lot of questions about whether or not that was the proper way to approach that from a civic standpoint. But you're 1,000% correct, Mike. I think there is a disconnect with he had some shenanigans with the business before he was mayor, and people were willing to forgive that. They liked what he did with the trash situation here in Fall River, and they liked you got a new high school coming online. There were things that he could point to say, look, I'm doing a good job for you. I know that might look bad. Yeah. The second round of indictments were
just made look like a thief.
A thief. Right. And again, he denies all the allegations.
And all the Hollywood production companies that were following him around, he lost his charm after the first indictment, and his boy embattled, and just looked like a common thief after the last one. What type of time do you think he will get with all your experience?
I think it depends if it goes to trial. If it goes to trial, which he has said it would, or his attorney said it would, and he is convicted out of trial, I think it's a long time.
How much?
Over
10 years?
I think it would be over 10 years.
Really?
But that's a guess. So I never predict what judges or juries are going to do. It's because they always surprise you. Yeah. Now, if he strikes a plea agreement, you could see it going below 10 years in that case. Now, also, what are we talking about here, Mike? Are they separating the two trials? Are they doing Snow Owl as a separate trial? Are they going to sever the two, which his attorney wants to do, and you're going to have the public corruption one separately, or are they going to be tried as they are on track to do right now together? All of those things change the math on how that's going to work out. And there are other co-conspirators that are involved, his former chief of staff, Andrade, all of them, how are those, tell me how those dominoes are going to fall, and then you can get a clearer picture.
Most have agreed to testify.
Except for Andrade, she has not.
Except for Jen.
Yeah.
She hasn't. The Fed's conviction rate is
very high.
Very high. Some people say it's because most people are afraid to go to trial against them.
Mm-hmm. The vast majority of these cases, Mike, don't go to trial.
Sure.
They are pled out prior to trial.
Your instinct, with all his narcissistic leanings, and maybe some other, undisclosed mental health issues there possibly. We're both not doctors, so we're not going to get into it. Do you think he will have the stomach and the cojones, for lack of a better word, to go to the wall and go to trial with this thing, knowing he may do 15 years in jail if he does?
I think as it stands now, yes. I think they are headed toward a trial. That is what they have told me the last time I checked when I talked to his attorney. So, yes. But, again, as they're going through right now the discovery, right? This is the discovery period. Sure. That's where the government gives them all the evidence that they have. Here are the tapes.
Sure.
Here are the pictures. Here are the people we talked to. They have to weigh those things and decide what kind of a shot they have. And if they decide we have no shot, then I think a plea agreement would be on the table. But as it stands right now, to answer your question directly, it's headed toward a trial. In February, by the way, is right where it's slated for now, though that could get moved.
Sure. So you think it's gonna go to trial, huh?
As it stands right now, I think that's a strong possibility. But again, I hate to predict